Tim, if it wasn't clear, also lived in the Bay Area, and
Yep.
he was part of an organization same as me, the SD Forum, the Software Development Forum. And so when he was doing research for his book, I was one of those people he reached out to get my story. For the last 20 years, I've taken my family to Europe for 1 month. And not this year because of COVID, we just couldn't travel. But for the 19 years before that, we'd rent a house in some city in Europe, and then we'd invite friends and family. And so that was a story that resonated with him in terms of his writing for our work week. Tim did his research very similar to the research that I did for the Credibility Nation, for the credibility work that I was doing. And what Tim really did is, and this is my understanding, so it may have been different, but it's when you end up talking to enough people about their stories on a focused topic, there are threads, there are trends, there are things that just pop out. And so what if I'm thinking about where he was, I think it was he was excited at the time about being a nomad. So not necessarily having a place to live and a place to call home, but rather being able to travel anywhere. And it wasn't as acceptable in society that you can actually live and work that way. And so what I would say is if you were going to redo Tim's book today, all the concepts are still relevant. They're just more acceptable in society. And so what I say now is the most important, so this is not advice for Tim, this is just advice for anyone. The most important thing that you can do when you're going through life is to understand who you serve. Because one of the 10 components of credibility is a desire to serve others. And how you can demonstrate and talk about who you serve is through what I call the CPOP, the customer point of pain. And your CPOP is typically 1 to 10 words. It is 1 to 3 seconds to say. It is one of those things that is beautiful because it is memorable. If it's memorable, it's shareable. And it typically begs the question, tell me more. And so what we've been taught in society is the first thing we want to say is the value proposition. And that is absolutely not the first thing you say when you meet somebody. That turns out to be the third thing you say. And the first thing you want to say is the CPOP. And so I have, if you look at mitchelllevy.com/CPOP, you can actually see my definition of the word CPOP, and then it will show you other words. So I've created a word called cred wheel. I've created a word called cred dust. I've created a word called cred crud. And so these are just ways in which to describe credibility. But tying it into what Tim has done, what I would say is very similar to what he said, the most relevant thing you can do is to wear on your sleeve your CPOP. Because if you live and work and act with essentially that very focused audience, that pain point you solve, what happens is you become a magnet. Because people can see you, they could see how you solve, they could see that you're a servant leader, and whether or not they need you, what happens is if you're memorable, they know who to recommend. So if they're acting as a servant leader, one of the things that's most important is, hey, I got friends, they have a problem. Oh, wait a second, Al Chen can solve this problem. Tim Ferriss can solve this problem. Go here. And that's where the CPOP's powerful. "20 years ago was during the dot-com days. Right. And anyone who is associated with e-commerce, so Esther Dyson called me Mr. E-commerce at that time, because I was the guy going around to CEOs and VP of operations and saying, you know, this is new technology coming. And with this technology, we're going to be able to talk directly to our clients. We're going to actually drop ship from our outsource manufacturers directly to our clients. And I was actually literally walked out of the door at some companies. And of course, we know what the internet's done.
Right.
And so anyone who was associated with e-commerce was busy as many hours as they needed to be, which meant that I worked my little fanny off because there was a lot of opportunity to both serve and make money. And so at one point in time, I was looking at my wife, and I wanted to give her some present. And this was, my son was, I think, somewhere around 6 to 12 months old. And I went to her and I said, there's a present I'd like to give you. And she goes, okay, I'm interested. She goes, because I was working 7 days a week. I said, I'm going to take every Sunday off and spend it with my son. And she looked at me like without batting an eye. She goes, okay, that's a great present for you. What about me? Excited that she was so good and so quick. So I said, well, give me a minute or two. And I started thinking about it. I started thinking about what she loved. She loved going to Europe. And what she always really wanted more of is family time. And so I said, listen, if you do all the work, if you book the travel and you could make it. And when we first started, we were going between typically 5 to 6 weeks. I said, if you book all the travel, I'll take the time off. And the thing is, I have a business where I can actually work anywhere. In today's world, the truth is, post-COVID, there is very few business, unless you're physically in a factory where they need you, either to service the machines or they don't have machines to do the work. Mm-hmm. Then you can work anywhere in the world, as you know, in your job. So I basically thought of all that and said, hey, listen, why don't you book it and I'll take the time. And she didn't believe me until we were actually in France the first time. And I said, this is great. Let's do it again. Right. And so that's what it's a place that she particularly liked. For many of the people who had visited us throughout the years, some of them never had a passport before and so we would just we wouldn't pay for their travel, but we would have the place and then invite them to come visit. So that would be the impetus for them to get the travel, get on a plane, get over to Europe and spend time with us in some city in Europe. I will take zero credit. So that was all my wife. And nowadays there are a lot better sites and the information's a lot better. But then I can't remember if it was VRBO, but there's a number of different sites out there. And so she would research. You definitely talk to friends, but what the friends mostly did is talk about a site or a location she didn't know about. And it was a lot more manual in the earlier days than it is in today's world. What Tim is particularly good at, what I'm particularly good at, is building systems. And when you build systems, that means that you put a plan in place and a process, and it's essentially ISO 9003. You certified if that was appropriate, of what are the steps that you need to do to get these processes done. And if you have processes done, that means that me as CEO, I'm not actually doing the work. I've actually hired people to do that for me. So I've always worked with, since I started working with VAs and outsourced people, even back in the .com days, didn't really figure it out till about 12 years ago. And that was when it was the previous, I can't remember the other name, but now the company called Upwork. Mm-hmm. So we've hired a number of people through Upwork to be able to execute on the processes. So the primary thing that I do in my company is come up with new products we're going to be working on, new things we need to be able to do, and I'm the primary rainmaker. Mm-hmm. The actual executional component that needs to happen, most, like 95, I end up being QA at the end. 95% of everything that gets done executional for the company is done through some process and people that we've hired. And I actually now have, I've worked long enough with some of my, most people would call them VAs. I just call them part of the staff. Mm. I've worked long enough that they're actually doing the hiring for me. So, like many, uh, probably Silicon Valley, even at that time, had somewhere between 2 to 3,000 events one could go to on a monthly basis.
Mhm.
And so the the SD forum was a group put together, a software development forum, and the focus, so typically what happens with all of these types of groups, they all have different business models. Can't remember exactly. I think SD forum was just an annual fee, and then they had a meeting once a month you can go to, and you were able to create. What they were able to do is find people who are smart in a particular area and run a particular I'm trying to think about what do they call them. They had a different name, but essentially a specialized group.
Mhm.
And what happened is the guy who runs 500 Hats, he was running a group on e-commerce. He goes, Mitchell, I don't want to run it anymore. Do you want to run it? So I ran it for a while. And then after a couple of years, I gave it to a guy by the name of Dave Nielsen. And so if you were running a group, then the people in the upper echelon, and Tim was involved in the upper echelon, people would get to see you and interact with you. And so it's like any other group. It's not nationwide. It's very geographical. SD Forum was Silicon Valley specific. The fun advice always is hold on to that Amazon stock that you purchased. I bought 1,000 shares, and after a couple of years, I go, I got to put this money somewhere else. So I sold 900. That 100 shares has done so well for me. So, but and then don't buy Webvan. So I mean, so it's easy to say, it's easy to say what to when you're in Silicon Valley. The real cool part is you get to see what's happening transitional wise in the world, and you get to place bets.
Mhm.
And for every 6 or 7 bets that either stay stagnant or disappear, there's a handful that just go nuts, right? So that's an easy one.
Mhm.
Probably the most relevant is the concept of servant leadership. I didn't learn until later on in my life.
Mhm.
And it's not just, I think so I did a TED talk in 2018, and in that TED talk, what happened, it got me thinking about where I've been and what's happened in my evolution. And I never had a mentor, particularly a male mentor, until when I started the workforce. And I happen to have somebody who is hedonistic and narcissistic. So I didn't really have a good mentor. So I was taught really bad rules that it took me. I was only with him for 1 year before I left. He was with me mentally for 13. So it wasn't until post starting working 13 years later, it's really 1997 when I started working for myself, that I realized, wait, I could actually be who I want to be. I could be authentically me. And I'm not going to get my next client unless I'm a servant leader to those I work with. So potentially, what's the advice to my younger self? Really get either listen to your parents when they tell you to be good to others, okay,
Mhm.
or start some entrepreneurial entity early and figure out what does it take to be successful, to get the referrals to come back over and over again. And the types of things that you learn there is applicable to everything you do. And that would probably be is to figure out how to aggressively find some mentor who I could really get to know, like, and trust, and who could put me on a path that would get me to where I am now much quicker. I think it's simply the being entrepreneurial. So this
Mhm.
is my credibility garage. I've worked out of my house since 1997, built this up since 2000. And so I'm very comfortable working in an environment where I have anywhere between 10 to 20 Zoom calls like this a day.
Mhm.
And to me, even prior to COVID, the opportunity to really get to see somebody and interact with them in this form of synchronous communication is almost, you can't quite get the hug in, but it's almost as good as anything else. And so when people, first of all, it was really amazing when COVID started, when everyone sort of started doing Zoom, and then people started talking about Zoom burnout. I'm like, well, if you're getting Zoom burnout, that means you're just going to the wrong meetings, or you're not running them effectively, or you don't feel the importance. And, the thing is, if you have real conversations with people, conversations where you come with your heart and you really share who you are, you get to know people. And that's whether or not you're physically in person or like this. So how has my life transitioned since the book came out? Just being able to figure out, as the world changes, what am I serving? What is the job that, and for me, job is not work. In the TED Talk, and feel free to look at the TED Talk and reference that. It's the same name as the name of the book, Being Seen and Being Heard as a Thought Leader. And what happens if work equals play, you can play all the time. So I've always loved what I've done. And the beauty of loving what you do is it really isn't work. So you got to figure out the different things you do that are play. You want to make sure that those people in your life, you get to incorporate them, in that. So a month away is a good thing. Having friends and doing set regimented things there, good thing. And I think probably the best lesson, one of my best lessons, all through life, there were many presents that were given to me. So one of the best lessons was the dot bomb. So during the .com days, if you're from Silicon Valley, I remember, I think this was an Accenture person standing up in a group. It could even been the SD Forum. And here was his recruiting call. If you could spell the word e-commerce, you're hired. That was what it was like at the time. And it was crazy, by the way, in a really beautiful way. And so during that time frame, this is the 2000-ish time frame, I was making $7,500 for keynotes, $5,000 a day in consulting. And one day, those numbers went to zero. When the dot bomb came, what happened is anything associated with e-commerce, people just thought e-commerce is not going to happen. So it's that first backlash of a transition of what the world's doing. And so the two lessons I took away: one, it's not personal, right? I didn't do anything differently that caused people not to want to do anything about e-commerce. Just simply the world didn't have an appetite for it anymore. And the second is it's important to have multiple revenue streams. So at the time I was running with one of my friends, I was running a CEO networking group. That CEO group was making $40,000 a year. It was, for me, it was so little at the time that I was just about getting ready to quit. And then the dot bomb came, all of my e-commerce stuff went to zero, and then $40,000 a year seemed like a lot of money. So having multiple revenue streams in areas which are not, like those people have their 401ks invested in the company they're working for and the company goes bankrupt, like all your eggs in one basket is not smart. I have interviewed 500 thought leaders in over a 12-month period on the particular focus of credibility. And what I'll say is many, many amazing things came out of it. One, I recognize one of my superpowers is clarity. So helping people figure out their CPOP is something that I'm really, really good at. Um, I have recognized that the definition of credibility in the dictionary is wrong. So I am, by the time people see this, they've already seen it, but I am now a week from the summit where we will be, and I have a book coming out as well. The book is called Credibility Nation. The movement is called Credibility Nation. It is, if you think about a very simplistic focus, I've identified 10 components that represent credibility. And so if you act and live in a credible way, you could just say, hey, I belong in Credibility Nation. And by the way, people who are in Credibility Nation can also do dubious things. So it's not a Bible on a wall. On the other hand, there are many people who just completely live in, and I call the other side, Dubious Nation. So the question is, do you want to live in Credibility Nation or Dubious Nation? What I will say is, Dubious Nation is winning 1,000 times over. And so here is the single thing that keeps me up at night. And that is, Dubious Nation is winning. And my goal, my mission is, in my lifetime, I will tip the scale. I kept hoping that somebody else would come along and sort of help us see a world where we can just live and act and be better humans to each other. Mm-hmm. And it was somewhere around interview 475 that I kind of realized that, hey, I'm the guy. I know credibility. I know what it means. It's not just a word. It's a way of living. Mm-hmm. And I'm the one that needs to help make this happen.